So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last day of live presentations at the NRHC 2021 virtual conference. It's great to have you all here. My name is Dr. Amory Delapizzi. I am an associate professor of biology at Dominican College in Orangeburg, New York. I am also the honors program director there, and I am the faculty representative to the NRHC executive board. So I will be the moderator for this session. So right now we are supposed to have 4 students presenting for this session. We have 3 students present with us at the moment. So the plan is the following, just in case we have that other student join us. We are going to have all of the students present first. Each student will be given 15 minutes to present. And once all the presentations are over, then we'll have time for questions and answers. So if a student is presenting and you have a question, please type that question into the chat room. And then when all the presentations are over, I'll have the students look at the questions in the chat room, and then they can start answering those questions. And we'll do it on a rotating basis so that each student will have an equal amount of time to answer questions. So does that sound good to everybody? Great. Yes. So let me first introduce the presenters who are here. So first up will be Madison Newman, who is from Dominican College, and she will be presenting on how pollen can be used as a tool to study climate change. This will be followed by Elizabeth Wash from Salisbury University. And her presentation is how does one reverse the destruction of diversity in a fragmented habitat? And then finally, we will have Alan Whelan from Frederick Community College, who will present on possible solutions for coral reef depth. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Madison Newman, who will be our first presenter in the session. And the title of her presentation is How Pollen Can Be Used as a Tool to Study Climate Change.
All right. Good morning, everyone. As she said, my name is Madison Newman. I'm a junior at Dominican College. The project that I'm doing is how pollen can be used as a tool to study climate change. My mentor that I worked with for this project was Dr. Regina Alvarez. I chose this project, so a while back we had to do just watch a TED Talk, take notes on it. But it was an interesting TED Talk about how you could use pollen to solve different crimes, because it's on the shirts and stuff. So I was interested on how you could use pollen with that. And then I've always been interested in the topic of climate change. So I decided I'll look into that. There we go. So really the first thing that I want to talk about, what is climate change? So a simple definition really is just a long-term change in the average weather patterns that have come to define Earth's local, regional, and global climates. So really what it's looking at is the levels of carbon dioxide that are in the atmosphere. So if you look at this graph right here, it's showing how years before it wasn't really that high. And then once right at 0 is at 1950. And then from 1950 to now, it kind of jumped up. I actually got this picture from NASA, where they said carbon dioxide from human activity is increasing more than 250 times faster than it did from natural sources after the last ice age. And so the reason why that carbon dioxide is important, if any of you have ever heard of what's called the greenhouse effect, and so it's just the trapping of the sun's warmth in a planet's lower atmosphere. And so how I read how it was explained is when the sun's energy reaches the Earth's atmosphere, some of it is reflected back to space, and then the rest is absorbed and re-radiated by those greenhouse gases or the carbon dioxide. So just some other ways that you can study climate change. Here's some examples here, diatoms and ice cores. Diatoms are just a major group of algae found in oceans, waterways, and soils, and then ice cores are those ice samples that are just from buildup of snow and ice and stuff like that. But what obviously I'm focusing on is pollen. So this on the right here is a picture of some pollen under a microscope. And so pollen, although many of you might know it from allergies. It's really the plant sperm is the simple definition of it. It's what's gonna help repopulate and like help plants recreate, I guess, best way you could put it. So my main goal for this project was just to explore how pollen can be used as a tool to study climate change, primarily in Rockland County. So I just put a quick, I'm sure you guys know where Rockland County is, but I just put it quick in here just to show you guys really what I'm looking at, because that's where Dominican College is. So that's where I wanted to really focus on. So before I go into how I did my project, just a quick definitions and then how I'm going to use these for my project. So what is a pollen signature? All the pollen species in an area, this can be different depending on what area or region it's being looked at. So really it's going to be the fingerprint of that area that you're looking at. It's going to tell you what plants are in that area. And this doesn't include just flowers, this trees, weeds, grasses, stuff like that. Really anything that's going to produce pollen. And then what is fossil pollen? It is pollen that has been preserved from past years that can be found in environments that lack oxygen or that are acidic, such as lakes or peatlands. So this is gonna, I'm gonna use these two things to study how maybe the pollen morphology has changed, because morphology could be the size or the shape of the pollen. It'll also tell me maybe what's, if there's more of certain pollen or less of certain pollen. One bad thing, I guess, about the fossil pollen that you find in these lakes is it's not going to be the full pollen signature that you're looking at, because a lot of it will be mostly wind pollinated species. And so those plants that are pollinated by insects won't necessarily be found as much as they would as the wind pollinated, such as like those grasses and like the ragweeds, which are what is going to mainly cause those allergies that I'm sure many of you are feeling now, because I know I am. So some ways to, or what I did for my methods was, first thing I did was with Dr. Alvarez, I started collecting different pollen samples from just around like my campus and stuff, and just study them under a microscope. So I couldn't study all of it at once, since I did start in the fall, and then winter came around and I couldn't really collect all that much anymore. So now I'm just being able to start collecting more again. So what really helped me, because then I had to collect and research that pollen signature, what really helped me for that was different websites. There was one website for Rockland County that gave me just what all the plants are. Another source was this app that Dr. Alvarez introduced me to called iNaturalist, that you could go take a picture and you could put it into a project, and then it'll tell you what the plant is, where it's found primarily. And so just different sources that I had to use to collect this pollen signature. And then to research that fossil pollen, just due to lack of resources, wasn't able to get that fossil pollen myself, but I was able to find different sources that collected those samples. And then I would want to look at the weather changes, such as temperature or precipitation, and to see how that goes with maybe if there was a certain species or a family that wasn't as in abundance as another, or wasn't anymore, or stuff like that. And then I would obviously analyze all of that. So like I said, I first started collecting pollen samples. So these 3 pictures right here were just 3 examples of different pollen that Dr. Alvarez and I collected. So on the left here is that corn, middle is groundsel, and then on the right is from a rose. And so I would just collect it, put it on a slide, and then take some cool pictures under this. I thought this is probably the neatest part, because it's cool how each species has a different morphology, has a different look to it. And you can tell too from the morphology what's going to be the stuff that causes those allergies, or what clings to your clothes or stuff like that. Because like that middle one that has kind of like that spiky appearance, it's going to stick to more things, whereas the corn won't really. And then for that pollen signature, as I said, I use those different websites just to kind of get a rough idea of the different plants that are going to be in this area. This isn't even a fraction of it. There's so many plants just for this pollen signature. But of course, I could give you a huge list. I don't think you guys want to read all of that, but here's just some examples. So that on the left, that's that ragweed that's going to cause most allergies. And then northern white oak, and then that shellbark hickory. And this is just a few examples. I tried to, on my next slide, you'll see, find the families that'll be found in the fossil pollen sources that I used. So this graph right here, I got from Dr. Robert Loeb, I believe he did a few different studies on fossil pollen and palynology, which is study of pollen. And he even said he was probably one of the few around here, at least, who've done studies on this. Like I said, it's not a very popular interest of many people, but it's interesting to look at this because it shows those families that I was looking at before, the Ambrosia, Quercus, and Caria. If you look at and you find them on here, oh, there it is. So there it is right there. And you can, it shows that the mean average of it kind of decreased over time, because down here is where it is earlier in time frame, and then up here is where 1981. And then at the Caria, you can't really see much information on it. But it's just a interesting tool to look at. He used from different lakes, different fossil pollen to study this and to study the abundance of it and how much was found throughout those years. Because as the lower you get in those samples, that's the further back in time that those were there. And so he used a different couple of lakes that were able to give me this information. And then to look at the weather patterns, so with the pollen signature and the fossil pollen, you can compare the abundance of those pollen species in those fossil pollen and see how the pollen signature has changed. And then I wanted to compare that with the weather patterns. So this information I got from NASA is really just how the precipitation is going to change. So at the top is going to be if there were no carbon emissions, and then the bottom is where there will be. And so this is just a 30-year prediction of that, but it's just showing how in certain areas there's going to be more precipitation and certain areas it's going to be less. And so I can use this to kind of compare those. Here's frost-free periods. So same thing, just at the top, that darker green is what it's been from 2010 and on, and then that lighter green is going to be what it was, those frost-free periods in the 1950s. And so it's just showing that throughout time, those areas are just going to get warmer faster than they normally would, or like they discussed, like with polar bears losing their climates, like that kind of stuff, the ice melting, it's just going to be more of those areas that are the ice is melting. And then this is just future temperature scenarios. Just again, that top one is showing without carbon emissions, and then that bottom one is showing with them. And so it's just showing how it's just going to gradually get warmer throughout time. And so I don't exactly have full results yet. As I said, it kind of froze over, kind of got cold. So it's hard to keep doing that study when I'm just not able to. So I'm going to keep doing it and keep doing what I said I've been doing, keep collecting those pollen samples, hoping to find more fossil pollen sources. But as I said, Robert Loeb said that he might have been one of the few who would have those sources for me. So I'll just use his sources to do those comparisons. But as of right now, that's where I'm at. And then I just wanted to go into, I mean, why this is all important. I could tell you guys all of this and you could say that's cool, but why does it really matter? How does that answer that question of, you know, what can we do about it? So for plants, what does this really mean is just, they're gonna have, many of them are gonna have longer blooming seasons, except for the ones who maybe their blooming time is in those colder temperatures. But for those ones that bloom in the warmer temperatures, they're gonna have longer blooming seasons. For the environment, it can cause, you know, those droughts, forest fires, And then certain species habitats will be affected. As I mentioned, those polar bears in the southern regions of the Arctic will be struggling, maybe not so much in the northern areas, and then for us, it just means obviously we'll be affected by those droughts and those forest fires, but two, it'll mean longer allergy seasons because those ragweeds will be able to bloom for longer periods of time. And I know those allergies are not fun to endure, but I think it's still important to look at because even though it might not affect us necessarily, it's definitely going to affect the habitat around us. And I think that we should definitely care about that. Those are just a few references I have, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Madison. So like I said, if for those of you who are just joining us, what we're going to be doing is we'll have all of the students give their presentations first, and then we will leave some time at the end for the students to answer all of your questions. So with that being said, we're going to move to our next presenter, which is who is Elizabeth Wash from Salisbury University. And her presentation is how does one reverse the destruction of diversity in a fragmented habitat?
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Wash. I attend Salisbury University as part of the Clark's Honors Program as a biology major with a chemistry and deaf studies minor. Today, I will be presenting my research of habitat fragmentation and the destruction of diversity. Specifically, how does one reverse the destruction of diversity in a fragmented habitat? In order to address and present my research on habitat fragmentation and the destruction of diversity, I will first be discussing the research questions that originally sparked the interest for this specific research. Then I will discuss the thesis of my research, the significance behind the research, and explain the overall key terms that were the main focal points of my research. I will then evaluate the relationships and connectivity between habitat fragmentation and genetic diversity, the potential results of habitat loss prevention, as well as how can one reverse the damage of habitat fragmentation, and the overall big idea behind my research. The research questions that I presented on this topic are as follows. How does habitat fragmentation affect the development of genetic diversity within a species? When a species becomes displaced, does this affect the genetic diversity of just that generation or for generations to come? How can one reverse the negative effects of habitat fragmentation to protect genetic diversity? These are questions that will be vital in understanding the overall connection of habitat loss and fragmentation and the potential effects that these processes could have on genetic diversity in species, ultimately affecting every species and ecosystem on Earth. My thesis of this research study is that the genetic diversity of a species is depleted when part of the habitat that they once inhabited is destroyed or lost beyond all repair as a direct result of climate change and human interferences. Habitat loss and fragmentation do more than just destroy the area that a species once called home. It completely changes the species on a genetic level, and preventing this damage reverses the once irreversible damage of habitat fragmentation. This thesis directly correlates to the research question and the significance that this research presents. The significance of this research is that it is extremely important to protect all species and the environment and habitats as a whole, because if one species is affected, then it will result in a chain reaction that will ultimately affect all species in a population. This damage that will be done is not just contained to organisms within the animal kingdom, but this damage will extend to bacteria, plants, ecosystems, and ultimately humans. Some may believe that humans are not affected by a change in the genetic structure of animals. but we are all interconnected, and any damage that is done will ultimately affect us in ways that are unimaginable. The first key term that I will be describing is that of habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is when a habitat becomes transformed into smaller patches of land that are isolated away from one another or destroyed due to human intervention or climate change. The human intervention that can cause this destruction can range from building roads to deforestation, and the increase in temperature brought on by climate change continues to destroy habitats that were once thriving. The picture on the slide shows an example of a habitat before and after a road has been built through it and it has been fragmented. This image shows the isolation that occurs when a habitat is broken apart and how it can separate species, giving these species smaller populations, ultimately creating issues within the species' ability to reproduce, adapt, and evolve, which will leave these species more vulnerable to potential extinction. The second key term that I will be explaining is that of genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is the variability within a species, or the number of different alleles of a gene within a population. The image on the slide shows a species of clam that have varying colors and line patterns, which are all caused by the genetic variability and diversity that is present in this specific clam species. The color differences in clams can actually help the ability for the clams to survive, as it will act as a camouflage to the clam's predators and protect the clam from being hunted, which shows how the genetic diversity in this species allows for adaptation and evolution. The idea of genetic diversity can also be applied to humans. One example being the various hair types that humans have and the potential advantages that certain hair colors may have had before civilization based on environmental adaptation. The relationship between these two ideas of habitat and fragmentation and genetic diversity are very important as they rely on each other for further success. Habitats allow for the genetic diversity to evolve within each species, acting as a nurturing ground for the species to adapt and evolve to the environment around them without being directly forced into an ecosystem that they are unfamiliar to. This nurturing from the habitat allows for the creating of variability in a species that makes it harder for the species to become vulnerable or even extinct. As the pyramid image on the slide shows, everything depends on genetic diversity, as genetic diversity is the building block for not only species diversity, but for ecosystem diversity as a whole. When a habitat gets disrupted, it can damage the genetic diversity and ultimately lead to irreversible damaging effects to all species and ecosystems. Interconnectivity is a vital concept to understanding the connection between habitat fragmentation and genetic diversity, as all species are interconnected in a vast and endless food web. When a species is affected, no matter if it is a species that is well known or not well known, and whether or not it is predator or prey, this will lead to a chain reaction of all species being affected. As seen on the slide, this image represents an example of a food web that is close to home for me, the Chesapeake Bay water bird food web. All of the arrows represent a transfer of energy and the cycling of nutrients. And this web shows the deep interconnectivity that is present just among these few species. This web also shows that if a primary producer diminishes, this will have effects even spanning to the tertiary consumer on the top of the food web, as all species rely on each other and depend on this interconnectivity for survival. Right now, there's destruction occurring in habitats all over the world, ranging from aquatic to terrestrial ecosystems. This destruction can come in many different forms, and this destruction is becoming a vast part of the environment, destroying ecosystems and leaving vulnerable species in its wake. The image on the slide shows just one small example of how human interaction affects not only the environment, but the well-being of all species that call it home. With this destruction occurring at rapid rates, species are disappearing faster every day, and habitats are losing all ability to protect the species that once called it home. Extinction is the ultimate negative outcome that could occur if destruction continues to break down ecosystems and habitats as it has been doing. When a species becomes extinct, that means there is no organism left, meaning that there's been a death of the last individual of a species, but some species can be considered extinct before this moment if they are already unable to breed and potentially recover their own species. Organisms can face extinction when there's too much competition for the resources they rely on, whether it is food or a specific climate or environment that surrounds the habitat in which they live. As an animal comes closer to extinction, the genetic diversity is deeply damaged beyond all repair, preventing any ability for the animals or plants to evolve or to adapt. The image on the slide shows extinct animals of North America, many of which have become extinct due to a habitat that has been altered, whether it is a rise in temperature of the earth or the destruction of ice or any aspect that allowed for these once thriving animals to survive. There is one measure that, if taken, can avoid these traumatic and vicious outcomes before they begin, which would be the prevention of habitat fragmentation and the preservation of these habitats. By protecting habitats, we would be able to let species and organisms have a safe place to adapt and evolve, and to continue and nourish the environment in which we live. If we begin to protect and preserve the environments and ecosystems we have now, we can attempt to save the damage that has already been done and provide a place for the nurturing of genetic diversity, which is what all habitats should be. By preventing any further damage, we can potentially prevent any complications that the human race might face, and not only save other species and habitats, but to ultimately save ourselves. If the damage has already occurred to an environment, this brings forth the need for the reversal of damage, ultimately meaning the reversal of habitat fragmentation. This can occur through the creation of corridors that can be built, which would allow organisms to venture from one habitat to another, enabling gene flow. The implementation of a restructure where certain populations are removed and placed into similar habitats, which are not isolated, would allow for the rebuilding of adaptive and evolutionary traits. As seen on the image on the slide, this is an example of a corridor built across a road, which allows the organisms that were once lived in a fragmented habitat to interact with each other and reestablish necessary gene flow to continue and create, as well as to protect the pre-existing genetic diversity within the species. The big idea of my research that I have presented to you today is that habitats preserve the genetic diversity in species and allow for the continued adaptation and evolution that is required for any species success. All species are interconnected, including the human race, so it is of extreme importance to preserve habitats, as it will be preserving our future. As the image shows, conservation of these habitats can lead to several benefits. And if we are able to decrease the amount of drivers of change that are used, then ultimately we will be better off and protect ourselves and all species for generations to come. These are the sources that I used to compile my research and to analyze the research questions that I presented for you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so again, if you have any questions for Elizabeth, please feel free to type them into the chat room and we will have the students answer them at the end of the presentation. So we are actually going to move to our third presentation, and we do have our final presenter here as well, but we'll put him on at the end. So for now, we're going to turn the podium over to Alan Whelan from Frederick Community College, who will be presenting on possible solutions for coral reef death.
Thank you. It's also caught me off guard that you pronounced my last name right, because most people pronounce it Whelan.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah. So
Let me turn
can
my
everybody see my
microphone.
slides? Okay. There's no like weird background noise. I think there was something running on my computer. Okay. So hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session. My name is Alan Whelan, and my presentation is an exploratory look at solutions for coral reef ecosystems. Sorry, move this a little bit. This project was originally supervised by Professor Lisa DiDonato for Frederick Community College's Academic Engagement Seminar course. This presentation aims to educate you about some of the serious problems facing coral reefs, such as ocean acidification and coral bleaching. We will also examine some of the best ways to reduce these stressors or to halt them entirely. By the end of this presentation, you will be able to answer these three questions. Why should we try to help the coral reefs? What are coral bleaching and ocean acidification? And what are some of the best interventions for coral reefs developed so far? So first, part one, this section will cover the benefits of coral reefs and the reasons why we should make an effort to take care of them. So coral reefs are very valuable for many reasons. On the economic side, Anthony et al. Estimated their benefits to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually in tourism and other uses. On a societal side, they're not only quite nice to look at, they are very culturally important to some local indigenous populations, such as in Hawaii, where they are named as one of the first organisms created in their historical chant, Kumululipo. Finally, on the scientific side, they foster a great amount of biodiversity, which is important for the evolution of traits in many organisms and the resistance to disease. So next in part two, we'll explore a brief overview of the issues that coral reefs are currently facing. So first we'll start with coral bleaching. The process generally works out as shown in this nice infographic. First, the corals become stressed by their environments. This, especially in this case, is generally due to the warming of the ocean. And then they, as they are stressed, they expel the symbiotic algae that live in their tissues and provide them with energy from photosynthesis. And then after this, since the zooxanthellae are
Okay, well, I guess there were some technical issues, so let's give Alan a minute to get back in, and so the presentation can be continued. Actually, while we're waiting, Madison, do you want to maybe take one of the questions that you got in the chat room?
Yeah, so I'll read it out. So first question, just I was wondering if this was the reason any allergies have been getting worse each year, from Richard Fulton. I would believe so. I mean, I would imagine that's why they're lasting longer over periods of time. If they're getting worse necessarily, maybe it's just the abundance of those pollens that are in the air. Like I said, those wind pollinated species, definitely just abundance of those that are just irritating your immune system. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to take one of your questions?
Sure. So the question is from Madison Newman, and it's, if these corridors you mentioned were built, how long do you think it would take to reverse those changes? Do you think some environments would not benefit from being able to join back together? So depending on how much the habitat has already been fragmented will determine the amount of time it will take to reverse the changes. It's been noted that habitats that were more recently fragmented take virtually like almost no time to like go back to their normal state because it was very fresh, versus ones that have been for decades take much longer to restore their genetic composition as they once were. And some environments, I think all environments in general would environment from some joint for the gene flow in order to continue their state of genetic diversity overall. And there are always outliers, of course, where there may be some that don't, but overall, I think it would be beneficial for all types of environments.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I think we have Alan back with us, who temporarily lost
Yes,
power.
So it was honestly kind of funny. It was like mid-sentence. Everything went completely dark. It was,
yeah, you just you froze completely on our
Yeah.
end. So I am going to turn everything back over to you. So are you ready to go?
I am just about ready to go. If you had any more questions, we could do that, or if you wanted to have Malik go first, then that would also be.
Well, I'd rather you finish your presentation since you had already started it. So were there any more questions in the chat room for either Madison or Elizabeth? Let's see. So
can I ask one question?
Yeah, sure.
Just for Elizabeth, and you may not have done this. Did you research any other sort of reversals besides the corridors? Were there other methods that you looked at?
I looked at the implementation of restructures. So where it was like you would take a small group of things that have been in a fragmented habitat, and you take them and you put them in an environment where there has been no habitat fragmentation, and they start to build up their genetic diversity once again, just within this new environment. So it's a different approach than corridors. It takes more time, obviously, and it has a higher rate of death among these species because you're being thrown into now a new environment. Even though it's somewhat similar, it's still not what they've been genetically bred to survive in. But those were the two main focal points of my research that I focused on, as we've seen the most success with corridors, and then this restructure is a newer idea that is being tried out. But thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, and I think Alan is said be right back. So we do have time for one more question. There's a question for Elizabeth from Alan, and I'll read it to you. I had a question about the conservation zones you mentioned. I was reading yesterday about large amounts of displacement in indigenous populations in the designating of conservation zones, not being able to hunt, etc.
So definitely, as the prevention, as preserving the habitats go, there is always going to be issues with no hunting zones, no building zones for the cultures that live there. I know I researched part of like when you have a city and you need to build more infrastructure, should you just move part and expand the city outward in order to like protect a small habitat that's within the city? Or should you just risk taking over that small habitat and do an example of the like the removal of those species and putting them into a different one? It's definitely an issue with indigenous populations because they have their cultural beliefs and we don't want to obviously put them at like risk for not having food. So it's still an ongoing problem that people are trying to make solutions for.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so Alan, are you ready to go?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so
Just
here's
got
what we'll
everything.
do. So Elizabeth and Madison had an opportunity to answer questions, so we'll let Alan finish, we'll let Malik go, and then you two will have an opportunity to answer questions at the end of your presentations. How
that
does that
sounds
sound
good.
good?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm
Sorry
gonna
for
turn,
the
no
brief
problem,
hold.
I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Okay, so back to where we were before. We were speaking about the coral reef bleaching process. This generally works out as shown here. First, the corals become stressed by their environments due to ocean warming generally. When they are stressed, the symbiotic algae or zooxanthellae that are living in their tissues are expelled due to this stress, and then since they're pigmented, that is why they turn the white color, um, and when they are bleached, and they are left to die without their food source from the photosynthesis from their algae. And so that is one of the main issues. And then our second main issue is ocean acidification. The process generally works out as shown here. First, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere continues to rise. Next, some of the carbon dioxide collides at the surface of the ocean and mixes with the seawater. And this raises the concentration of hydronium, or just protons in the seawater, which raises the acidity of the ocean and reduces the concentration of calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is very important for organisms, and especially corals that need to build their skeletons out of calcium, because they need to take this in from the water around them. And if there's an absence of it, their skeletons become less dense, and or they aren't able to grow much at all, and they're weak if their skeletons aren't dense enough. So both of the issues that I've covered so far contribute greatly to the deaths of coral reefs. And now in part 3, we will cover some solutions that have been proposed so far and how they can be applied in the field. So the best course for dealing with both of our main issues is to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, since both ocean acidification and global warming are so heavily reliant on them. This will take a while since the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is constantly increasing. However, the emissions could be reduced by strict legislation, including penalties for failure to reduce carbon dioxide emissions to an acceptable level for industry leaders, as well as incentives to reduce these carbon dioxide outputs further. One example. Sorry, I just realized my slide is completely different, and I had noticed something weird on one of my earlier slides that leads me to believe that that was a much earlier. Oh, is it? No, that isn't it. That was a much earlier version of that slideshow. Here it is. And so they were very much in the wrong order. And once I get that out of full screen, can go back through these. Now we have the proposed solutions and how we can apply them. Two of the that's still, sorry about that. Well, I thought it was a successful recovery, at least a slightly successful recovery. Yes. Okay. Oh. Okay, I see what happened, I think. Swap presenter view. So I will just rocket through the end of this. Okay. Here it is once again. And we are actually going to go to our long-term solutions first. So we are actually going to start with what we can do in the long term. So there's these issues that are impacting coral reefs are both generally mostly due to rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The generally, what is generally thought of as the best option is the different carbon systems or systems for dealing with carbon dioxide outputs. So there's of course carbon taxing. So this would be both for industry level and for consumer level. It is market-based carbon pricing, and it could push businesses to find solutions because if they don't want to pay a lot of money for their carbon emissions, they may be more motivated to create better green energy solutions. And then there's also emission trading systems, which would see carbon emissions capped based on industry, then permits issued up to a permitted cap per emission source. These permits could then be sold or traded between companies, and they could be bought from the government or from other businesses as well. This would be similar to carbon taxing, as it is still expensive and puts a price on the carbon, but it's given more room to fluctuate throughout time, and also more room for competition between businesses in the industries. One mandatory ETS program is the RGGI program, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which many northeastern states are actually a part of. It is the first mandatory emissions trading system in the US, and covers the power sector here in the Northeast. It has collected approximately $3.8 billion since its implementation in 2009, and has been successful. As you can see in the graph, this is the millions of tons of CO2. These are the caps per year. So in 2014, the cap was all the way at 83, and it has gone down since then. It has been successful. However, it hasn't quite reached its full potential. It could definitely do much better on a national scale if it was able to be implemented. And as much as both of these will help, they will take a long time, or they'll sort of take a long time to really take effect. For the when the carbon is lowered in the atmosphere, obviously the effects will still be there afterwards. And so in the meantime, there are a few different techniques for the short term for helping corals directly. Both selective breeding and gene editing accomplish largely the same goal. in helping the corals. The selective breeding, they are both basically, they're very similar. So there are corals that have naturally evolved over time to be more heat resistant in Papua New Guinea and in Japan. And research on these corals could lead to discovering sort of which genes allow for more heat resistance and which genes allow for, a longer time before the corals expel their zooxanthellae. So the if research could be, if more research could be done on this, then it could be very beneficial to these corals. So selective breeding was used more often in the past. It's generally people think of it in terms of dogs for dog shows. Parents with ideal traits are selected, and then they are bred to create more of the desirable traits in their offspring. However, it can be a slow and inaccurate process depending on the organism, and it also has the risk of adverse effects in some cases. So that is where gene editing comes in. So CRISPR-mediated gene editing, and specifically, would be, it would take much less time, and it would be an ideal approach. CRISPR stands for clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. They are regions of bacterial DNA that are used for memory and to create an immune system sort of like our own. When foreign DNA enters the cell, it is bound to sort of a seeking RNA, and it is taken to the DNA and compared to see if there are any similar, see if there are any complementary strands on the DNA. And if there aren't, then it is added, a cut is made in the DNA to add it in. So research, and then when it enters again, then the bacteria will know that it isn't supposed to be there. So researchers saw this and realized that we could reverse engineer this process in other cells too, and create our own enzymes to introduce very specific controlled mutations and cuts in the DNA. So if we engineer a sequence that would be fitted, that would fit well in a strand, then introducing it in the DNA is easy after a specific, another specific protein is made to introduce this cut. Unfortunately, we do still have a decent way to go before this will work. As I mentioned before, there are many unknown coral genes, including the ones that control heat resistance. Another important aspect of this heat resistance is the molecular relationship between algae and corals specifically, or I should say like a molecular level understanding of their symbiotic relationship and why the corals are even expelling them in the first place. In addition to this, it'll also take a lot of time to actually transport the bred corals to coasts and to actually plant them in the sea and wait for them to propagate to spread these new genes as well. And then obviously, as I mentioned before, this solution won't work by itself to help with the if we fix the corals, the underlying problem is still present, and the carbon dioxide is still increasing. So this project does recommend a combining of both where did it go? A combined treatment plan is the best option. And this works out fairly well because obviously legislation and CRISPR gene editing are very different fields. So if this can be concentrated on, then it would be very beneficial. And most importantly, any efforts that are made must be started as soon as possible, or we risk losing these coral reefs entirely. So thank you so much for, these are my citations, and thank you so much for sticking through that this morning. If this topic interests you, I suggest visiting these websites shown. I'm not sure if the slides are posted online, but you could also always email me for the links. So I'll pass it off to Malik now. Again, great job so far, Elizabeth and Madison, and yep, good luck. That was all.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, a little tough time there with the technology, but you persevered and made it through. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So we
not
will be
sure
moving.
what's going
Well,
on with
what
the
we'll do is,
slides.
that's okay. We'll move into our final presentation. And at the end of that, we'll take some couple of final questions. So I'm going to be turning over the podium to Malik, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Atadzhanov, is that close enough? Okay. Malik Atadzhanov from Kingsborough Community College. The title of Malik's presentation is Factors That Affect the Further Conservation of the Snow Leopards and Future Progress that can be Expected. So I'm turning it over to you.
All right, am I screen sharing now?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
We're having a, can everyone hear him?
Whoa.
It's a little bit.
How about right now?
That's better.
Okay. Anyway, that's not sure what those headphones are doing. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, whatever you are, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So my presentation, as you mentioned, it's on the factors that affect the further conservation of the snow leopards and the future progress that can essentially be expected. Now, a couple of words on why I started it and personal reasons. So I grew up in the mountains of Tajikistan, country which is predominantly mountainous, 98% in fact. And there's markets, or as we call them, bazaars, which I would go to as a kid, and I would see snow leopards dead, like their skin just all over the place with their skulls and everything. So I would, and I'm an animal lover, so I was like, oh my God, this is so horrible. So it was like a traumatic experience that kind of lived with me and still is with me for the rest of my life. But, so that's what kind of leads to this presentation. Slide in, there you go. Okay, so why does it matter? So snow leopards, or snow leopards, or Panthera uncia, is a very vulnerable species that lives predominantly in the mountainous habitats, and they're dominant predators in their own environment. So snow leopards have spread across the vast area of Central Asia and Western Asia, including like the one that I mentioned, Tajikistan, China, Nepal, India, Kyrgyzstan, Bhutan, Mongolia, and Russia. So it's a huge, most likely a post-Soviet type of area, including China as well. And they have a white-gray coat. Let me show you. Well, as you've seen in the previous slides before, they have a white-gray coat. They're actually super beautiful. And actually, they're friendly most of the time. Believe it or not, people think they're gonna attack you just for you looking at it, but they actually try to avoid people, so they're not as hostile. They are predators, so don't take my word. Go into the wild and try to, be friends with one of them. Not the best of ideas, right? So as of right now, their population is estimated to be in 5,000s, and you can see the spread of that's estimations from 2017. So it could be higher at this point because, sorry, it could be lower at this point because for the past 20 years, their population has been decreasing at a steady rate of 1.3%, and yeah, so it is about 5,000% at this. So this is the map. The red areas on the map is the areas where they usually live and they travel, and they're free travelers. So they would go with their pack and rumble upon all these areas that you're looking at, right? So, and they're free to range and they're free to do whatever they want, except sometimes there's border boundaries where they get hunted down, which is sad. That's why their population is increasing. So the snow leopard is an absolute keystone species to its environment because they exert top-down effects in their environment. Um, so essentially, research done by Institute of Technology from Great Britain uh, has found out that they are, as being the top effect in environment, a keystone species for they control the population of the herbivores in the environment because they would spread out too much if it so happened to be that uh, there's less of it. There you go. It's loading. So snow leopards, like I said, they've been decreasing every year. So their current habitat locations should be further identified. They're kind of identified, but the thing is, it's mountainous areas and they're really hard to reach. So it's really hard to understand where exactly they are. So we kind of pinpoint areas of nearest 5 to 10 miles, plus minus they give it, so it's kind of hard. But right now, what is being implemented is by using the Zoo Nation app, which is a planning tool. And the logic of one snow leopard per 100 square kilometers locations. They try to find habitable regions that exceed areas of 10,000 square kilometers. And those areas these days are called the landscape conservation units. But there you go. So as you can see, this is the map that it would look like this if the snow leopards disappeared. And we're talking about over the years. So as you can see, the population of herbivores would completely increase in that of the autotrophs. So autotrophs would essentially cease to exist, and that would eventually lead to the non-existence of herbivores and omnivores. So this is super and extremely important because there are other top predominant species like wolves, but wolves act in packs. And if packs keep increasing, they're going to decrease herbivores and carnivores, which would even further decrease autotrophs. So either way, it's a network that's linked between each other. They're all interconnected. So if one species goes down, essentially the system is going to be completely intertwined, and nobody knows what's going to happen. But most likely, a lot of the loss of biodiversity. Okay, so sites where the snow leopards can survive and reproduce. So areas of their natural environments were analyzed from 1982 to 2017, and like I said, using the Zoo Nation app, it was used to identify potential future landscape conservation units. We'll refer to them as LCU from now on. They've identified the area, which is Taishan, Pamir, Hindu, Kish, Karakoram, and Hindu Altai area. All of those are mountainous ranges as you've seen it on the map, the red areas, those are all essentially mountainous areas. And it's a humongous area. But unfortunately, hunting and poaching and climate change are soon the factors that make us think that there should be change. Anyway, so these are the LSU, and I won't get into details, but essentially what they did is they did a research of, they found out the area that I mentioned, the Tian, Pamir, Hindu, Kashu, and there's a lot of other mountains. And they mapped SLCs, which are conservation scientists' modern conservation map locations. And essentially they include different points in them, like survivability of the place, how much leopards are getting poached there, how much food is in that location, how survivable is the actual area, how is the climate change going to affect that particular area. And they came up with around 7 proper places. So as you can see, the number 2, it's a very low, and it's a Tianchi area. It's a very low principality pinch point area, which leaves it to be highly unlikely with time within the next 50 years for leopards to survive there. So the red areas are on the right side. It's the 1 number, are the places where the leopards will be able to survive in the future in the next 50 years. So, and this is the presented loss from the climate change. If the slideshow is going to allow me to move. Oh, hello. Hi. Oh, okay, there you go. Oh, so the climate change is real, right? My opinion. It is happening right now, and it is the single most important threat to our beautiful world and its biodiversity. And the carbon dioxide levels has been increasing, sorry, I wish it was decreasing, for more than 250 times faster than it did from the natural sources after the last ice age, which is about 12,500 years. Since the 20th century, due to burning, cutting down the rainforest, and farming livestock, the global temperature has been increasing at an extremely frightening rate. It's actually very scary. Um, so the research that you're looking at right now, it studies LGM, and LGM is research that studies of, as you can tell by the 2070 is the year that they've been researching. So they look at particular areas of where stable habitat will be preserved by the year of 2070. And as you can see, all the green areas and all of the bluish areas are are the areas that will most likely be lost, and they would no longer be suitable for snow leopards. So again, so West Lines and TPHK will be the areas, and mostly towards Ural Mountains, where the areas where snow leopards will be able to be preserved. Hopefully, if the plan goes right as is planned for the International Snow Leopard Association and the UN. So this is the climate change effect in the last what is that? 50,000 years. So as you can tell, we're right there at the mark of 400, and I think it's already 425. But this is a 3-year-old program. It's at 425, the carbon dioxide levels, and it's parts per million. It's incredible. It's absolutely devastating, and it's gonna probably keep increasing. Although with COVID year, we have seen a little bit of decrease, which is a good thing. But then again, there's COVID, so it's kind of hard to reassemble it. So they have identified a total of 2,327 places where snow leopards can be preserved, and those areas were further given to the Association of Snow Leopard Conservation. So the outline of the climate change research. So the habit shift caused by harmful human activities, again, as I mentioned, the fossil fuel burns, the deforestation. So they implemented their models, and they're called the representative concentration pathways, or the RCPs. Why did you move? The global temperature increase for that model is expected to increase by 3 to 7 degrees Celsius by the year of 270, and a precipitation of going down by 10%. So there you go. Okay, so here's the model. The model was implemented through 3 researchers, and the most recent one being GSLEP, the one that I just talked about. So they took a research by Beijing from 2008. They took research from LSU from 2014, and they took together all these maps, and they were able to find the most suitable. All those research kind of did the same thing. They were trying to find the best suitable place for snow leopards to survive. And they, as you can see, the bottom left side, they crisscrossed all the maps to try to find the best places where the conservation could happen. And again, it led them to the path of THKL places, mountains, which is on the left side. Okay, there you go. So now for the human intrusion, right? So throughout history, humans and animals have coexisted, and most of the time, people tend to bring a negative impact, actually, upon the environment and its biodiversity, which hugely impacts their conservation. And now the snow leopards, it's an excellent example of it. As it was previously mentioned, the snow leopard is a keystone species in mountainous areas of Central and Northwestern Asia, and they're facing extinction due to the retaliatory killings, poaching, and a decline of prey species, and most importantly, habitat degradation. So the snow leopards usually don't tend to attack people, like I said, because they've learned over the centuries that humans possess stronger firepower, which determines the encounter fatal. The main confrontations that occur between the two take place mainly due to livestock plundering and less due to poaching. So what happens is there's going to be less prey in mountains, and the snow leopards, they live not too far from livestock, which is they live about like several miles, but they can travel those distances easily. So they count down to the small villages that are next to the mountains, and they kill the sheep or the goats or whatever it is, and then the people would come out and shoot them because they're like, oh my God, this is basically my life. If like I don't eat, I'm gonna die. If I don't sell it, I'm gonna die. So they kill those leopards, and and is the least of worries that there is. So retaliatory killing is like the very least, and it's actually a commonly accepted term that it will happen and will continue to happen. So the global leopard ecosystem protection research has actually implemented some works in retaliatory killings. So instead of leopards being killed, they actually refund the money of the people that got their livestock eaten. So they replace their livestock with money. It's actually pretty cool. So poaching and habitat degradation. Oh, that is a serious one. So poaching and habitat degradation has been affecting it. I mean, since like we can remember, but the statistics on it has been taken since the 70s. And the last time, out of the 144 households owned and reported average 98 yaks, that's in China, per household, the economic loss attributed to snow leopard depredation was estimated to be around $100,000 per year per family. Right. So the poaching, it kind of started with that, but most importantly, it's more of like because every skin of a snow leopard is worth anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000, and their skull is about $500. And if you catch them alive, it's anywhere. If they're super big, it's about $15,000 to $20,000, and if they're small, it's about $10,000 to $15,000. So it's a lot of money for that particular area. It might not be such huge money like in the U.S., but over there you become a millionaire if you catch one, kill one, and whatnot. Sorry, I'm busy. Sorry. Wait. So sorry. Somebody was knocking on the hotel door. I apologize. So this ultimately brings us to the conclusion that snow leopards and human conflict in that region is minimal, but mainly due to large presence of wolves, which terrorize the herders far more often than the actual snow leopards. So the monitoring of snow leopards poaching was completed by both media and literature analysis inside people present at those black markets that I was talking about. I lived near one of those, and where the trading would occur. So the report published that estimated between 300 and 400 snow leopards have been continually poached every year since 2008, and which is about 1% of their population killed every year, and they can't reproduce that fast. So the territories that are most known for snow leopard poaching occur in China, Mongolia, Pakistan, India, Tajikistan, and unfortunately, these numbers are considered to be lowered because most of the time the poaching remains undetected through the complex informatory logistics. It is evident that the future of conservation of snow leopards is highly dependent on international aid and cooperation, and the Glow Snow Leopard and the Ecosystem Protection Program, the sponsorship of the United Nations Development Program, along with the Snow Leopard Trust Fund, had put forward projects for all participating countries, which are going to be discussed in the next programs. Okay, so as you can see, these are graphic scenes, and on the right is essentially how a black market would look in the middle of the mountains. It's just probably a guy with the skin just standing there, very happy with his life that he caught and he can make money for his family, which is understandable, but at the same time, it's a life of an animal that, you know, had nothing to do and never touched him probably. And on the left side, you can see a small leopard baby being caught. And what is being caught for, it's either to go to the zoo or go, actually 75% of them go to Arabic countries because rich people want to have leopards at home. Because why not? Why not have a leopard at home, right? Anyway, next picture. So this is the climate change. Coming back to the climate change effect. So on the left side, you see mountain of Tajikistan, Kushkaro, and the photo on the left is from the 1930s. The photos on the right is from 2018, same time of the year. As you can see, there's a lot less snow, and we're talking about tens of tons of snow, of thousands of tons of snow. So it's like a lot of loss in that area, and actually, it decreased the biodiversity greatly. Sad. Anyway, again, snow leopards, they just get tossed like that, and yep, this is exactly what happens. This is Pakistan, black market. So the international transboundary collaboration and the future areas of focus. It is evident that the conservation of snow leopards, like many other vulnerable species on our planet, requires cross-boundary cooperation and interconnected strategic planning. So as a major effort for the preservation of snow leopards, the global, or I'm just going to list, GSLEP was established in 2013 with the support of the UN and the Global Environment Facility, and their first ever international snow leopard. Okay, conclusion, got it. All right, so
Yep.
we'll move on. So the research goes by the identification happens. Overall goal is to secure at least 20 healthy populations. It did not happen, so they moved it to 2022. And basically every single region was given their own project, and they're like, hey, you do this and to preserve your space. And they were given to nine different countries. And at the end of it all, next year they're going to have a symposium where they're going to discuss their progress. But so far it's actually been on the good side of it, so do expect some good changes. I was going to talk about the projects, and this is just how they meet and talk. This is I think 2013 Bishkek. And these are my references. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please send them into the chat, and I'll be more than glad to answer.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Malik, for your presentation. So we're kind of running a little bit short on time. So why don't we just take one question per student? So I think there was a question for Alan in the chat room.
Yep, I think there was one for me.
Okay,
And
so-
yeah, I did want to apologize. I didn't see my time running out messages.
That's okay. That's okay.
When I was in full screen. But yes, Steve Hundayak asked, or did you want to read the?
You can read the question. That's
Okay.
fine if you have it.
Steve Hundayak asked, climate change has been increasingly raising sea temperatures. So the question is, do I think it's more important to focus efforts on conservation of existing reefs and growing them back out with selective breeding and CRISPR, or more beneficial to prepare for life post-coral extinction by creating artificial ways to absorb ocean carbon? That's a really interesting idea. I know that there were some methods that I didn't get quite a chance to cover during my presentation that have been proposed, such as shading areas of reefs and chemically treating the water, I believe, was another one. So those are definitely very interesting. However, the problem with post-coral extinction that I don't think I quite emphasized is similar to concerns that had been made in Malik's and I think maybe it was Madison's presentation with the food webs, because coral reefs are a very large ecosystem and they're very diverse, and so many fish live in them and rely on them that they're basically like very big dense cities almost. It's like almost like if like every state capital and major city like disappeared, I suppose, or like all the buildings disappeared. It would be a disaster. The ecosystem would break down. Coral reefs are ecosystems specifically, so it would have super like incredibly devastating effects on our food supply, on the food supply of fish in the ocean, the environment, just everything. It would be a complete disaster. So that was a very good question because I didn't quite address that. So thank you. I hope that answered what you were asking.
I think you're muted.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. I still haven't gotten this technology thing down. So we do have time for one more question. If anyone has a quick question from Malik before we wrap things up.
Yeah, I'm seeing a private from Omar.
Oh, go ahead.
So yeah, the question is, what are the future projects? I was gonna talk about them, but briefly. All right, let's talk about like one of them. So each region was given a project, and let's put one in Pamir, right? So Pamir, they're given an object of like, hey, here's an area of a specific amount of square kilometers. Okay, so this is your mission. You find out what's the population, what's the exact population in there, and they do it by like setting up camera traps, sending like people like that, like scientists that find out the exact population. And then what they do after that is they analyze how they move and what they require for them to move in between the regions, because they have to move to a more survivable region in the future. So then they analyze that, and then with the help of the international collaboration, they talk you through on how a pack of leopards can move through specific mountainous areas, because most of the majority of the problems happening are on the borders, because that's where the poaching happens, but also that's the international borders. You can't just not respect them, you know. So there's a lot of mutual diplomatic collaboration happening on that matter. So there's a lot of bureaucratical stuff that goes down, but there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of it as well. That's one of the projects, and there's many of them.
Thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate all of the presenters in the session this morning. So job well done. I'll just make a couple of quick plugs for the rest of the conference. So we're at the end of our, live presentations, but we do have the awards ceremony, which begins at 11 a.m. So if you want to come to that, that starts at 11. And then next Thursday for students, we have an expo and a graduate fair from 4 to 5 p.m. And there will be prizes if you come and you visit the different exhibitors at that. And for faculty and staff, we have our business meeting next Friday, April 16th, starting at 1 p.m. and a student caucus following that from 2 to 3 next Friday. So again, I thank you all for coming to this session and most importantly, for your support of the Northeast Regional Honors Council. We couldn't do this without the support of our membership. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day and congratulations again, and enjoy the rest of what remains of the conference.
Thank you so much. You too.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Thank you.